Before we begin, I hope you will join me in acknowledging the history, culture, and stewardship of the land of this region's indigenous people, most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit, a Mississauga Ojibwe First Nation. We seek to live in respect, peace, and right relations with them as we live and work upon their traditional territory. I speak these words in recognition of the shadow of colonialism over all of Canada, like so many other lands and peoples occupied, past and present, as we'll see this evening. I'm Josh Heumann, Curator of Education and Public Programs at the Power Plant. I have hopes that you've all seen the exhibition, Ellen Gallagher, Nu-Nile. The artist recommended this film because it grapples with several of the same themes she explores in her artworks. The exhibition remains on view through Monday, September 3rd. Ellen Gallagher worked very closely with our recently departed Curator of Exhibitions, Carolyn Koschling, with support of Nabila Abdel-Nabi, Assistant Curator, Justine Khalil, RBC Curatorial Fellow, and Paul Zingroni, Head of Registration, Installation, and Facilities. The exhibition is made possible with gratitude to many donors and supporters: Hauser and Wirth and Gagosian, Diana Billis, Hal Jackman Foundation, Pro Winco Pro Art, Rosamond Ivy, and Nadir and Shabin Mohammed, Sheldon Intonwash, and Lynn Factor, and the U.S. Consulate General in Toronto. We are also fortunate recipients of funding from the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Toronto Arts Council. And finally, the Power Plant thanks BMO for supporting the Power Plant's all-year, all-free admission. While I often deliver introductions to provide context for specific programs, I'm in an unusually delightful position to welcome Vincent Van Velsen, with special thanks to Gagosian for transporting him to Toronto. So Vincent Van Velsen is an Amsterdam-based writer, critic, and curator with a background in art and architectural history. He regularly writes for individual artists, institutions, and magazines, amongst which Frieze, Flash Art, and Metropolis M, where he also holds a position as contributing editor. He curated exhibitions for Castrum Peregrini, Framer Framed, Kunsthaus SYB, and Museum Vlehitte. I think I came close, among others. In 2014, in collaboration with Alix de Massiac, he won the second edition of the Curatorial Prize of the Dutch Association of Corporate Collections, and in 2015-16, he was a resident at the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht. He currently is working on forthcoming exhibitions for Tent, Nest, and De Brache Grond. Van Velsen is a board member at Frontier Imaginaries and De Apple. So following Vincent's introduction and the screening of the film Wan Pipel, we invite you to step outside the theater, just in case you have questions for Vincent. So without further ado, I welcome Vincent to the stage.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Josh, for the introduction, and thank you to the entire Power Plant team for having me here tonight, especially Josh and Kendra. And I also have to thank Ellen Gallagher for inviting me or initiating this invitation. And I also want to thank Gagosian for getting me here, especially Sarah Jones, Sarah Hoover, and Emily Kenselaar, who made this possible. And of course, I want to thank you people, the people of Toronto tonight who came out here to listen to me and watch the film together. And in order to start out, I would like to show a short clip of the movie, because it's kind of weird to start without any introduction or without any visual introduction. So it will provide some context to what I will say afterwards, and maybe just a little note to that. You might want to pay attention to like the environment, like the city and like the people who are there, and especially also the music. So I would like to start that clip. Actually, so we just saw like about 2 minutes of the protagonist of the movie, who's called Roy. And it's kind of when he just came back to his home country, Suriname, from the Netherlands. So Suriname is right there. And I think it's good to kind of give a small geography lesson. So that's why I put on the map and kind of give a brief history lesson as well, or not a lesson, but like kind of a brief history introduction, because probably most people don't really know where Suriname is, what it is, or what kind of the context is. So we'll briefly tell something about that to start. So it was colonized in 1650, and before there were mainly indigenous people from the Arawak and the Carib tribe, so it's Caribbean, so you understand from that. And after the colonization, actually, of the British, they started plantations there, and in order to do so, they deployed a lot of enslaved people from African descent. But then the Dutch in 1667 captured the land from the British. Around the same time, the British lost the land, captured New York or New Amsterdam at that point from the Dutch, and then they came to the settlement that they wouldn't argue amongst each other, but just like leave it like that. So then a lot of British citizens moved to Jamaica and took all their belongings, but also the people who worked at the plantations, and that's kind of where the Dutch colonization of Suriname started. And that's so they also started plantations, actually working in the same way, having a lot of people from Africa as enslaved workers on their plantations, and this lasted for about 200 years until July 1st, 1863, when slavery was abolished in Suriname and officially in the Netherlands. And it was by means of international and both international and national pressure. However, the formerly enslaved had to keep working for another 10 years to compensate and reimburse their former owners for their loss. But this also had to do with a way to keep the economy running. But then still many people moved to the capital Paramaribo, which is in the northern part of the city, of the country. And because of this diminishing workforce, the Dutch were looking for kind of a substitute workforce. And in neighboring country, British Guiana, which is in the west, neighboring on the west side of the country, they saw that the British were employing a lot of people from Indian descent, and they were better able to, or they were quite good of coping with the climate. Because before they had invited people from the Netherlands themselves, just before the abolishment of slavery, kind of to see if they could take over that job. And then what happened was that a lot of them died from like the climate and the hard work. But then, so the Indian people, they were actually able to work in this climate. So the Dutch made another deal with the British, and actually invited people from India to come and work in Suriname. So that's when the first people from India, which we'll see in the movie, arrived in 1873, June 5th. And meanwhile, also people from China had arrived, and a lot of people from another Dutch colony, which is on the other side of the world, from Indonesia, also had come to work in Suriname. So that's also what you will see later in the movie, or in the movie in general, that there's like these different ethnicities, different communities present, and they kind of are isolated. And then also when you would go back to the clip we just saw, I want to also say something about the music, because this is music by Lieve Hugo. It's a Surinamese singer who was at the moment of independence, 1975, was kind of the most famous singer in Suriname. And he also made a song for the independence, which is called Trividentie, which roughly translates into independence or self-determination. And actually, it was the case that he was supposed to perform this song at the independence ceremony, but he died 10 days prior. At this day, I want to go to the flag, which is the next slide. At this day of independence, the colonial flag, which is this one, was actually for the last time raised, and then the new flag, which we'll see just in a bit, was raised for the first time. Because Suriname only got this flag in 1954 when the process towards decolonization started, like in this context of Second World War, just after it, and then the international pressure to kind of get rid of colonies. And the flag was, the first version of the flag was designed by Lou Lichtveld, who was also the co-writer of the script. And this flag is actually designed by his daughter, Noni Lichtveld. And you can here see the different ethnicities being represented in one circle. So the black is the black population, the brown would be the Hindustani population, the yellow would be the Chinese and the Indonesian population or Javanese population. The red would be the indigenous and the white would be the white. So you kind of have this segregation of ethnicities, which I will come back also, or which you will see definitely in the movie, how the different ethnicities and communities relate to each other. So then at independence, they actually got a new flag, which is the next slide. Here you also see like it's a Hindustani politician, Lachman, and Ferrier, Aron, sorry, who's standing next to each other, kind of introducing this new Surinamese flag to the people. So instead of like having 5 different stars, it will be one yellow star, which is the next slide, which then the flag is in color. So this is kind of this important moment, how when the change of the segregation of the different communities becomes one community, which actually has like 5 arms or legs, like kind of still referring to the former flag, but then having a golden future in a sense. So let's see, then this one nation, that was kind of the future, is also the title of the movie, which is One People, so it's one people, it's the same in English, I suppose. But then maybe it's good to say also that like the One People, it's like it's the way it's written is like phonetic in Dutch, which is still used in Suriname as well. And then the Dutch language is still being used because it's kind of a neutral language within the country, because all the different communities have their own language, and then like the Dutch would be like the it would have like a colonial background, but at the same time it doesn't relate to all the different pressures between the different communities. So let's see, then I think it's good to say that, to maybe related to Ellen's work as well, because this new nation, because Suriname was kind of this segregated nation, and then this new flag and like the independence was kind of a way to make a new nation state instead of like a colonial state without a communal background, communal culture, communal history. So it kind of relates to the concept of the new Negro, which Ellen deals a lot with as well. And then I quote in a text from 1925 when Ellen Locke writes, "The old Negro, we must remember, was a creature of moral debate and historical controversy. He has been a stock figure perpetuated as an historical fiction. The Negro has been more a formula than a human being." And then a text about Ellen's work. "When African American culture entered into modernism, there was no old Negro to rediscover or reclaim only historical fictions, only historical fictions produced in the vacuum of violence and dehumanization that defined African and Caribbean identity in America under slavery. Black modernism sought to create a new Negro at the very moment minstrelsy was moving from the aura-drenched halls of vaudeville to the increasingly simulacrum-bound imagery of cinema. Within this context of the intensification of mass and image-defined culture, where people of color are forced to claim an identity they were taught to despise, then the very creation of the self, an act of radical creativity, was invented." So this concept kind of also applies to the independence of Suriname in a way that there was no history, there was only like a caricature of the country. There was no like real knowledge about it, and so the self had to be reinvented or invented actually, because there was no reinvention. So there's in the movie you will see at a certain point that the Dutch girlfriend of Roy comes in, and she enters the party by saying, just after she arrived in Suriname, she always expected the country to be like this, like warm, cozy, and always a party going on. So there's like really limited perception of what the country is or would be is really like shown there. And then later she goes to the inlands of the country or the forest towards a small village along the river, where she kind of discovers like the real Suriname, or like the more elaborate version, where there are like the nature and the mosquitoes and the piranhas, and she kind of doesn't like this. So it's kind of this interaction between like a perception and how the perception doesn't fit the reality. And then actually the second scene of the movie, you have Roy when he's still in the Netherlands and he's studying economy there. He got this like kind of slight like daily racism moment when an uncle of his girlfriend actually tells him he has been in the Netherlands for 5 years now, so he's not black anymore, but one of us. This shows how being black is a fiction or a caricature. It is this old Negro where Locke speaks about. So to create a new Negro, or the Surinamese identity in this sense, Wan Pipel constructs this identity or contributes to it and creates this new self. The movie constructs a layering of diversity and identities present in the country, in the same way Ellen Gallagher actually deconstructs and constructs new images of blackness by using magazine images and literally adding layers actually. So this movie shows the people, the diversity, the cultures, and the different environments and different provinces of Suriname. And then we'd like to go to the next slide. So throughout the movie you would see several cameos of the different people who are present in the country, so the different communities kind of slide slowly along. So you have like a Javanese ceremony at the beginning, then there's like an elaborate presence of the Hindu culture for when Roy has a new girlfriend who is from Hindu descent, and then you kind of see like the marriage is present there, and they go to the inlands where you can see the maroon culture, and there's also the indigenous people present in the film. So you kind of have this slowly building up, creating like the diversity that's actually present in Suriname instead of this one-sided idea of like a colony. Then I would like to go to the next slide. So, and then I want to talk about the relationship between the two countries, so the Netherlands and Suriname. So as said before, Suriname was a Dutch colony for about 300 years. And 3 years after the abolishment of slavery in 1876, the colonial government introduced compulsory education for all children between 6 and 12. And interestingly enough, this is way earlier than it was actually happened in the Netherlands itself. This was, of course, a way to keep hold of the colonial subject, as the Dutch language could be imposed via the schools, but also school children would learn geography, culture, and whatever more, all based on the Netherlands. So in that sense, they would learn and know everything about the colonial mother country, but kind of were lacking knowledge about themselves, and it wasn't really, there was no culture created in that sense, or culture educated. At the same time, like the Dutch would also not learn about their colonies, about the colonies, so that like the perception of Suriname in that sense is limited and not really created. And then in the film you will see how Roy is a student in the Netherlands, something which was quite, or still is actually quite common, when you would be like, in a sense, economically able to go to study, and then you would go to the Netherlands, because Suriname actually didn't even have a university until 67, and up to today, like the level of education is not the same as in the Netherlands. Like the Netherlands is way higher, so in that sense, like people would still study in the Netherlands. And quite a few people wouldn't come back, and that's also a struggle which we'll see in the movie. And then I think it's also good to say that a lot of these people who actually studied in the Netherlands, or came from Suriname, studied in the Netherlands, then came to the conclusion that they always thought of themselves as Dutch, because they had the Dutch education, all this cultural background, and then when they would arrive in the Netherlands, they would kind of be confronted with this, with their foreignness, so not being Dutch. And that's where they started to understand their own Surinamese-ness in a way. So they would kind of have this realization that they might actually not be Dutch at all. And so it's actually said that most Surinamese people only became Surinamese in the Netherlands. And the independence movement, here you can see a demonstration. So can we go back one slide? because this is the last slide was about an image of a demonstration for one people, one nation, which is also the title of the film. So let's see. And in the film, you also would see the clash between the father who's interested in having Roy going to study and finish his study, and that's what it's really like. He focuses on it all the time because he still has this idea that the ideal of like what it is to be successful is like money and wealth and being in the Netherlands, and studying economy would be that dream, as the colonial dream. And that's the awareness kind of comes when people would study abroad and actually experience what it really entails to be in the Netherlands, and then coming back homesick and disappointed. And that's what you would see also with happening to Roy when in the first scene his mother dies, is almost dying, and then they ask him to come back to to Suriname and be at the funeral. And this funeral is a really specific or a really important moment in the film, and in general, because I think it's like a symbolic way of showing the independence of Suriname. So it's kind of, you have this, so you have the funeral, and then the mother is being carried to the grave, and there's it's kind of a funeral of the colony, I would say, because the mother country in that sense is being carried to the grave. And that's when we can go to the next slide, because this is at the funeral. And then you kind of see the dying generation of the colonials making way for the new citizen, because this is kind of where it starts. His affair with like the Indian woman would start after the death of his mother. And I think it's also really important to say that prior to independence, the Netherlands actually invited Surinamese people to come to the Netherlands because they speak Dutch. So the Netherlands needed a workforce, and they were thought like, yeah, let's just have the people who already speak Dutch come to the country and then work there. And 40% of the entire population of Suriname left between the 70 and like early 80s to go and work in the Netherlands and live in the Netherlands, and that's also an important element you will see in the movie. And taking into account that the Suriname only has 500,000 people at that point only living there, and then 40% leaving. And at this point, still, it's about 500 to 600,000 people living in Suriname. So 350,000 people in total left. So in the movie kind of tells the Surinamese people to come back and build the country or not leave at all. And then kind of this clip that we just saw also relates to that, like making a statement for like how good the life in Suriname is, and how you can kind of enjoy all the fruits literally, and also the fruits of the labor, and how the country has a lot of potential, but then you have to be there to kind of gain it and make it do it together. And then I want to go to the next slide to come to a conclusion in a way, because I want to say that the movie was a huge success in Suriname, and people went to see it like over and over again. And I also, for example, saw it through my father, who also like, it's like really important, and it's the only movie that has been made between like as a collaboration between Suriname and the Netherlands, and actually it never happened after. But in the Netherlands, it was like a big like failure actually. The company that made the movie went bankrupt, and because like the director Pim Parra would say, the Dutch audience just wasn't interested in a movie about their own colonial history with non-white protagonists. So for them it was too foreign in a way. And up till that point he was quite a successful filmmaker, but afterwards he actually did like only small projects, and he moved back to Suriname, or actually Aruba, so another colony of the Netherlands. And then I want to end with a positive note, which is the next slide. I want to say that it's not, the film is just not about independence, but about liberation and about the creation of a self. So the country needs to, in the film you would see how the country needs to undo itself from its colonial connection and the colonial love affair they had, which is literally being shown in the movie. And that love affair cannot continue. So this rediscovery of the home country from a history of and kind of overcome the history of differences between different communities and the history of colonial fiction. So Wan Pipel moves beyond the bounds of a singular form, coming to terms with the racial unconscious, colonialism, and its discontents. It is a movie about liminality, hybridity, and complex constructions that together construct a unique whole and a sea of possibilities, which is the next slide. And in that sense, like the sea of possibility, you would also see in the work of Ellen. And this is actually, I think, sufficient to go and watch the movie. So, thank you.